What is going on, automotive fanatics? It's Peter, your automotive fanatic, coming at you once again with another DIY. So today's project is something that I have been requested quite a few times in the past. Just never had a chance to put together a video. But what we're going to go ahead and do today, we're working on a B8.5 RS5 today, and we're going to go ahead and do the install of a set of coilovers. Now the process in itself is not too difficult. It's a little tedious to do. Specifically on the back, you do have to drop the subframe. That's not too bad at all. It just takes a few bolts to allow the subframe to come on down so that you can go ahead and remove that rear spring. Now for the front, that is also a little more of a tedious process, as Audi has the complete shock assembly that also has some connection arms to it, and I'll show you guys once we get to that part. But what makes that one specifically tough is the fact that it's just bulky and heavy. Even though this vehicle is an RS5 B Series 8.5 chassis, this is going to be applicable to, again, the B Series. And what I mean by that is you're looking at the B8s and the B85, the B8.5, A4s, A5s, S4s, S5s, RS5s, Allroads. They are pretty much the same process. Where it might get a little tricky is, I believe on the B8 compared to the B8.5, there's actually a couple of different items you may have to remove, but overall the process is going to be very similar and you guys should be able to tackle it. So without further ado, my friends, let's go ahead and get started on this beautiful example of an RS5 coilover install. This part here, I'll show you guys how to remove the front part of the subframe, or at least the cover. This is going to be the driver's side, and there's actually a cover that went over here that you have to remove. That allows you access to the plate that holds the front part of the subframe here. I have removed this bolt here, this one here, and this one here is all part of the front portion of the subframe. You need to remove those to allow the front part of the subframe to come down. While we're under the vehicle, let's talk about a couple things that you need to work on. What I'm showing you here is going to be the back end of the subframe. This bolt you have to remove, and again that allows the subframe to come down like that so that you can remove your spring. Now taking a look over here, this right here is going to be simply your shock bolt that you do need to remove, and I'm going to move right over here. This is going to be your end link bolt that needs to be removed from the control arm here. So you do want to go ahead and remove both of those. Top side, let's go ahead and look at things that you also have to remove. Now what I'm pointing at right here is going to be your auto leveler sensor for the headlights. You need to make sure to disassemble that. Otherwise, when the control arm drops, you could break that, and you don't want to do that because it causes all kinds of issues with your suspension and the computer setup. So remove that. We're going to go ahead and just take a quick peek up here. There's going to be 4, let's take a look here, 1, and there's 2, 3, and 4. You want to remove those little plastic screws that allows you access to the front or the top of the shock assembly up here. So we'll go ahead and remove those. Now when you are lowering this whole assembly, it's very crucial that you want to put a jack underneath here, because the spring right here is going to create quite a bit of force that's going to literally shoot this thing down. So make sure that you have a jack to support that weight. Alright guys, so we're getting ready to lower this assembly so that we can remove the spring. In the very front, I went ahead and undid the 18mm to the front subframe bolt, and I did remove the rear. I'm going to go ahead and lower my jack, and this whole assembly should come down smoothly. And now you guys can see how loose the spring is. Now you can go ahead and remove the spring. The next part of the coil is we're going to go right up here and just simply unbolt the two bolts that hold the shock in place. I went ahead and removed both of the 16s, and my apologies, I had done that, forgot. The shock was still kind of dangling, and as you can tell, the shock came down pretty easy after you remove the two 16s. So let's go ahead and simply just remove this shock here. You do have to compress it a little bit to get it out. Just like such. So for you guys that are just doing simply springs, obviously you don't have to remove this, but you do have to go through all of the other hoopla of lowering the subframe and pulling out the spring. Now from here, you're simply just going to go reverse order, putting the spring in and just kind of buttoning everything up, and you guys can watch the remaining of the video to see how I do that. But shock's done. We're going to go ahead and remove the top hat of the shock and install it on the coilover setup. So we are on the passenger side, and what I did over on the driver's side to this point is I went ahead and put in the spring as well as the spring perch with the adjustable sleeve. I put the shock in and I hand tightened everything over on that side, but I did not torque it down because I still wanted some play in the subframe. So on the passenger side, I went ahead and dropped everything like I did on the driver's side, remove the spring, and now I'm going to go ahead and remove these 4 plastic clips here, and then the two 16mm bolts to get the shock out. So that will be the disassembly of the driver's side and the passenger side shock as well as the spring. For the reinstall of everything, the way that you want to go ahead and do it is for this specific setup, I went ahead and put the spring and the sleeve on. I went ahead and installed the shock, and then from both sides of the car, once you've got, again, both of those installed, you want to go ahead and lift up from the rear subframe on up and go ahead and tighten the subframe. And what that does is it brings the whole assembly up so that you can actually also tighten the front subframe bolt. So you'll do that. Let me go ahead and give you guys some torque specs as to what you need to do. Now for the shock to chassis bolts, those are going to be set at 37 foot-pounds, and there's 2 of them. For the shock to the knuckle itself, that's going to be 111 foot-pounds of torque. You also have the longer subframe bolts, that is going to be 85, and then you have in the very front here 2 of the front subframe bolts, which are going to be set at 40. And the last thing that torque wise, you do want to go ahead and torque the sway arm to the knuckle, and that one, let me see if I have it. That one I do not have, guys, so I will make sure to include that value in the description. Just make sure also that you do tighten or replace these plastic bolts that you removed to have access to the shock. And then finally, since you do have to remove that front panel on the subframe, make sure that you also put that back as well. So we're going to go ahead and start working on the very front coilover setup, and I wanted to run over some things that you guys will need to take apart. Kind of taking a look at the very first thing here. This is going to be your steering rack, and it goes right over here to this knuckle. You're going to have to remove this here. Now the challenge with this one is, because it is a ball joint, you're going to have to use one of those tools that goes underneath here and pushes down so that you can get this steering rack off of this knuckle. So that's one thing you need to remove. Kind of here is another item. This is going to be, I'll just call it the horseshoe, because it looks like that. It attaches to the bottom of the shock. You need to remove this bolt here, and you're going to kind of come on up here. This item over here is going to be your end link bolt, so you have to remove that there. And if you can kind of see here, that is the lower end of end link that you may also have to remove. Now these lines here that you'll see, I would recommend that you want to remove those, because what that does is when you're pivoting this whole knuckle out, it gives some room to the line so that you don't pinch them. Kind of going up to these items here. Now this is the entire assembly that I was referring to in the introduction of this video. That whole piece has to come out. There's actually two control arms that come out. Now you could either remove this bolt here that allows both of these control arms to kind of pop out, and you can remove them, or you can go ahead and, a little dark here, my apologize guys, the inside control arms, you can go ahead and remove those as well. Now the option is, again, you could remove those and keep this attached to your knuckle, or you can keep that in there and remove these. So when you bring this whole assembly out, these arms are going to be part of it. So those are the things that you're going to have to remove. Now moving down here, this is going to be the bolt that holds the bottom of the shock in. You're going to have to remove that, and you're going to have a strut spreader. So that is that you'll need to do. Now this plastic trim, I have always removed it, because what that does is it gives me a little more room to work behind here. Otherwise, this is all going to be in the way. So let's go ahead and kind of go toward the very top here. You're going to see the chassis. There's going to be 4 bolts. There's one here, one over there, and then 2 over there. And what I did was I removed the plastic trim here, and you're able to access both of the bolts here. Now over on the other side, you'll do the same thing to remove all the bolts. The main difference is you're going to have a auto leveler on the other side, so you'll need to disconnect that. But that are those are the items that you need to remove for this part here of the front disassembly of the shock. So I went ahead and removed all the items that I discussed with you guys here, and we were able to get essentially everything ready for the shock to come on out. Let's go ahead and just kind of go back here. I wanted to show you guys again that ball joint. And this is the tool that I used, and the way that we did it is we just put it like such, and this part here is the part that you screw, and it pushes down on that top portion so that the whole assembly will come on out. So again, we went ahead and removed the lower horseshoe, I call it, bolt, and here is my strut spreader that you see. Here's kind of the bottom of the shock. I removed the brake lines, or at least loosened them, and all that we have left to do now is essentially remove these bolts that's going to be up here and the 4 on top. So I will do that and update you guys. Okay, so the shock is out, and let me kind of show you guys the whole assembly. This is the whole assembly that comes on out, and when you are bringing it out, you kind of want to kind of jiggle it a little bit and just contort it to get it on out. Make sure you're very cautious with the liner as well as your paint. If you want to go ahead and tape this, you definitely can, but I took my time and kind of grabbed it by the front and in the body here so that I can pull it out. But this is the disassembly of the shock. Now what we'll go ahead and do is we're going to break off the top hat bolt, and we're going to go ahead and get the new coil in here. Now when you transfer this whole assembly to the new coilover or shock that you have, you are going to have to use spring compressors because this is under a fair amount of tension. So get yourself a good set of spring compressors. So the coilovers have been installed on the passenger side here, and what I'm doing for the reinstall is essentially going reverse ordered. What I did was I went ahead and put the coil in. I went and bolted the 4 bolts up here, and from here I went ahead and tightened this hand tight. I didn't torque it yet, and from there we'll go ahead and push this horseshoe thing up into the shock body. We'll tighten it. We'll go ahead and tighten the end link here. I'll go ahead and push these back up into their respective locations, and then we'll go ahead and torque everything down, also to include this ball joint right here. So let's go ahead and do that real quick, guys. So we have the shock and the entire assembly put together here, and I wanted to give you guys some torque specs. On top you've got 4 shock to chassis bolts, and those are going to be 30. You have the camber arms to the strut assembly, which is going to be these right there. You want to go ahead and get those to 30. You have the pinch bolt here, which is 30, and you have the lower strut bolt down on the very bottom, which is going to be 66. The sway bar end link is going to be 29, and the tie rod that we had to use that special tool on is going to be the highest at 73. So go ahead and torque those down. If I missed anything, feel free to post up and I'll definitely get the torque specs for you guys. Now that we have finished the install of the coilovers on our project RS5, you guys have seen firsthand that the project in itself is not quite as straightforward as we all would like it to be. Specifically, you have to drop the rear subframe on the rear suspension to actually pull the springs out, so it can be a little tedious. As far as the front is concerned, again, not too bad. It's just that complete assembly that you have to pull out to get the whole assembly to be changed and to swap out. So I still believe you guys can do this project on your own. Make sure that you take your time and have the required special tools. I will state again, what's really going to help you out is having the knuckle spreader, that's going to help out, and to also have the strut spreading tool as well so that you can pull that shock out. Now overall, this video wasn't quite as comprehensive as I would like it to be, so I most likely missed a few things that I wanted to include. So if you guys have any questions or concerns about the install, feel free to go ahead and post up below, and I'll go ahead and do my very best to get you an answer to the questions that you have. As usual guys, thanks for supporting my channel and watching another DIY, and until the very next time, I look forward to seeing you then.